things that we, again, this is not there, so.
No, of course not.
So
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's nice, David.
Well, so the other things we explore here in this movie building series is how do we, how are we kind of building the next social movement? So you talked about 380 people, you talked about engage, you talked about some work groups, so maybe you want to just kind of elaborate on how does this group organize itself?
Yeah. Yep.
And what if we were involved, what would that look like?
Yep. I think there's a couple ways that people have been involved. So we talked about that orientation process, and small groups are usually meeting with David or a member of the forum to get kind of the background on what is this all about, what does this look like, what's going to be expected of me, and then they're kind of thrown into the mix of it. Twice a year we hold a large forum with the entire membership of the forum, and usually there's some sort of either outside speaker or local speaker that galvanizes an issue that we're moving forward. So John Powell, that used to be here but is now in Ohio, came to talk to us about what next generation African American leadership is going to look like, and what are the new skills that are needed that are different than the skills that we needed during civil rights leadership time. And so it helps for the entire forum to pull together as a group and say, okay, here's what we're doing, here's what's going on. Then there's these small work groups that are meeting. Some are larger than others, but there's an education group, a health and wellness group, culture, family, and spirituality, and community building, which is our economic development group. So those 4 groups are really digging deep on issues, and those groups, which are probably between 50 and 60 people large, are meeting once a month, and they're developing a policy agenda together. And so for each of those different areas, we have people that are investigating what best practices are. They're figuring out who's doing good work. The education work group has done an amazing job. They have a strategy called Influence the Influencers. And so what they've been trying to do is figure out who are the decision makers and how can we start to move the dial on some of the issues that we're trying to move forward. Alternative teacher certification was one of the issues that's near and dear to their heart, and when the Race to the Top application came forward, they did a really good job of providing a letter of support, which members of the forum could sign on to or not sign on to. And they did what we call sort of the helping hand and the elbow in the side, where we say, we'd love to support your application, and that's wonderful, and I'm so glad that you're figuring out that alternative teacher certification thing. And what happened as a result is we had a great conversation with the Education Commissioner. We had members that met with Education Minnesota, the teachers union. We have nonprofit folks that have been trying to meet with Education Minnesota for the last 15 years about alternative teacher certification and haven't been able to have that conversation. But when you have business people around the table and teachers and nonprofit folks and government folks, you're able to kind of move into places that you normally couldn't.
I have 2 more hard questions that again we
Come on.
Okay, so there's 2 things that I think is interesting. You've talked about this a little bit, kind of the strategy of building an agenda, a common agenda. But so I'm just thinking about the sense of like political power. So what? So this is the African community is what percentage in Minnesota? Okay, so again, it's an economic. I mean, it's a numeric minority in a representative democracy.
Yep.
So how do you have political power to actually change some of these policies?
Part of the strategy that we've had is to help people start to understand that it's not the African American agenda, it's the Minnesota agenda. And there's a good example that Angela Glover Blackwell, who's at PolicyLink, talks about. When they first started putting in those dips and sidewalks for wheelchairs, they had a big federal conversation about it, and it's so important and we need to do it. And every small town across America was like, we don't have anybody in wheelchairs. We don't need those. You're going to close down all the businesses. We're not going to do it. You can't make us, the normal. So, so it ended up happening. And so now if you're pushing a stroller or you're pulling a suitcase, you use those dips in the sidewalk. It was intended for one specific community, but it was something that was broken for everybody. And so when we think about our policy agenda, the issues that we're passionate about are where the system's broken. It's like, African Americans are the canary in the mine, and that's where you can see that there's problems in the system. But once you fix that, you fix it for everybody. So as we've talked about this agenda, it's really about how do we fix what's wrong? We've looked at the Minnesota Business Association. They have their policy agenda, and they've got alternative teacher certification as part of their agenda as well. And so we're going, well, who are these unusual partners that there's something in it for them. They see that they don't have the prepared workforce. When you talk to General Mills, they as a company know that it's important that they have a diverse workforce, otherwise they can't be competitive. What they're doing now is they're going down to FAMU, an African American college that's in Florida. They're recruiting during the summer and tricking people to come up here, and then it gets cold. They stay for one winter and they ask to be transferred someplace else. And so for the companies, they know that they have to do this, and it's much easier to get an African American student from the University of Minnesota who's already sort of adjusted to the cold to stay. But you have to have an education system in the state where we have a prepared workforce. And quite honestly, as we talk about the crazy racial disparities that we have here, I mean, we have racial disparities that are worse than Mississippi. Minnesota, what's the issue? What we found is if we can't address those, as the white population gets older and older in the state and the minority population grows, you know, we have this idea of Minnesota's the best at everything. That's, number one, that ship has sailed about 20 years ago. But we're going to be in a world of hurt if we don't address these issues. So I think that's the way that when you have a small population, you can really address it, because we're trying to fix it for everybody.
I'm glad I didn't write those down. Right?
Yeah, that's nice.
So, well, then here's actually a question that I did write down, or that we did talk about.
Yeah.
So the action agenda, you talk about this action agenda. What does that look like? When is it going to be released?
Yep.
Tell me more about that.
Yep. So we have an action agenda that we're developing, and it's going to be a policy agenda like you traditionally see. The other two places where we've seen the opportunity to create change are within organizations, because there are some policies that have already been changed, but it's how it's being implemented in organizations that's an issue and that's causing some of the racial disparities. And then there's also issues that are happening within African American families as well. And so as we think about our action agenda, it's about the policy level, organization level, and individual level. And if we can hit all of those places, I think that we'll be really successful. What we also hope is that for the broader African American community, they can find their place within the agenda where they can make a difference. When the women's group first met, one of the great conversations that we had, somebody that does early childhood work said that she had read a research study where for children that every morning have a hot breakfast and the kids make their bed, their grades are higher. And this is because they have the nutrition that they need, and there's a sense of consistency and responsibility that starts in the morning. And if you can put that in place, your kids are very successful. So all the women that were around the table were like, okay, number one, do I do this in my own home? No. But I try after I heard about it. And then secondly, if I work in an organization that works with mothers, can we start to talk about this? Can this be part of the conversation? Who can I tell? Can I tell my sister-in-law this? Can I tell my neighbor this? What can I do just to sort of support this idea in the community where I can have an impact? And so as we think about the action agenda, it's really about where can you find your place and where can you make a difference in these issues that you care about.